It's been 5 years since the release of Marvel's Avengers. Isn't that crazy? It's also crazy that they made Spider-Man a PlayStation exclusive character, and basically everyone agrees that he sucks, with the general consensus being that he feels like Insomniac's rendition of the character, but worse. Which is true, but what does that really mean? Why exactly does Spider-Man suck in Avengers? This entire video will be comparing Avengers Spidey to the Insomniac version, specifically from the original 2018 game. I know that this may seem like an unfair comparison to make, for several reasons. Insomniac focused all their attention on one main playable character, while Avengers had to spread work and focus across multiple different superheroes. Additionally, Spider-Man 2018 and Avengers are two completely different types of games, a single-player open-world action game with a linear campaign versus a multiplayer gear-based game with heavy focus on build crafting. And yeah, all of this is true. These are different games with different focuses. However, Spider-Man in Avengers is so remarkably similar to Insomniac's rendition of the character that it's impossible not to compare them. While Spider-Man has been in a ton of other video games before, and there are of course similarities between those different titles, none of them are as directly similar to Insomniac's work as this is. Especially because Avengers Spider-Man is so different from all the other characters in the game that it genuinely feels like they adapted Insomniac's work instead of taking their own stab at him, more in line with what the other characters are capable of. There's a lot of similarities here and there, but the biggest and clearest ones are: Number 1, Spider-Man cannot block or parry. He's the only character in Avengers who can't do this, and it's because, number 2, the block button, R2, is instead used for swinging, just like in the Insomniac game. No other hero in Avengers uses R2 as their main method of traversal. And number 3, Spider-Man can do a takedown on enemies by sacrificing a full bar of intrinsic meter. This works completely differently to the intrinsic meters of all other characters in Avengers, and that's because they've turned it into a ghetto version of Insomniac's focus meter. These three things together feel to me like a pretty blatant attempt to recreate Insomniac's work. I won't be discussing Spider-Man's gear here. I made another video discussing the character's gameplay in Avengers, and I got a handful of comments saying, "But you didn't talk about the max level 175 gear though!" And like, look, I get it. Gear is a fundamental part of this game, but I do not care. What I care about is how well Spider-Man's abilities have been translated into gameplay. If the gear actually made meaningful changes that mattered more often than not, then I would think differently, but it doesn't. So once again, we will not be discussing gear in this video, except for one little exception we'll get to later. Now, with all these disclaimers out of the way, what are the problems with this version of the character? The two main areas this Spider-Man lacks in are in visual presentation and game feel. And sound design, but that's a problem across Avengers as a whole. Still, it's much more noticeable with Spider-Man because of how you can compare him to the Insomniac game. Like, listen to the sound effects of his basic attack combo. It doesn't even sound like he's hitting them. Also, peep the sound effect that plays when you charge his web shot. Ugh. Let's start with Spider-Man's presentation, the visual component. And I'm not talking about the design of his suits, I've made a video on that already. I'm talking about two main things here: the quality of his animations and his speed, or lack thereof. These two problems are purely visual, but they still have an effect on how you perceive the character and how it feels to play him. Even if he did control well, which he doesn't, you'd still notice how awkward his motions are, which would bring down your enjoyment while playing and make you feel decidedly less cool. And I think a lot of people are immediately going to think of the web swinging. Yeah, it's bad. Everyone knows it's bad. It's basically the only thing people know about Avengers' version of Spider-Man. It's slow, it looks awkward, we all know. Everyone knows this already. I'm not going to talk about it. But that wall crawling though. His wall crawling looks horrible. He moves his whole body around like a snake and it's so gross. I don't even have to compare it to the Insomniac game. I feel like any Spider-Man game has wall crawling that looks better than this. Wall crawling is one of the most basic, essential components of Spider-Man and they completely bungled it. When it comes to his basic ground movement, Avengers falls incredibly short of Insomniac's work. This is mostly due to how Insomniac created two different movement states for the character, resting and combat. When resting, or out of combat, Spider-Man stands and moves more normally, but when in combat, he assumes a combat pose, lower to the ground, and his walk/run animations change to a more ninja-like movement. Avengers Spider-Man has both a resting and combat pose, but no combat movement, so he'll transition from his lower to the ground combat pose to his fully upright running animation, which looks kinda weird. Even the animation for Avengers' idle pose is a little weak. Insomniac Man is actually striking a heroic pose, while in Avengers he's just sort of standing there. His combat pose could use some improvement too, and I find it really weird how his back muscles pinch together when he does this. Like that can't be normal. When Spider-Man's gameplay was first shown off, something people latched onto immediately was how awful his web shooting animation was. I even made a post about it on the Spider-Man PS4 subreddit that got over 1,000 upvotes, and then was removed with no reason given. Yes, I'm still mad about that. The animation itself was pretty bad, but it was the horrendously awkward pose he took when aiming that made it hard to look at. Both the aiming pose and web shooting animation were actually changed at some point, and it's significantly less embarrassing to look at. I say at some point because I'm not actually sure when they changed it. Trust me, I looked. Keep in mind that Spider-Man released November 30th of 2021. On Reddit, the only post I could find commenting on this animation change was a post from March 31st, 2022. However, I remember seeing that post when it was first posted and already being aware of the animation being changed, so I think it was changed before that, but I can't find evidence of exactly when. I went through every patch note for the month of March 2022, and none of them mentioned changing this animation. What's really funny though is that if you look closely at his reload animation, then you can tell that after reloading he assumes the original web shooting pose before correcting himself and returning to the new one. While they did fix how the web shooting looks, they didn't address how slow it is, because the fire rate is pretty slow. Compared to the Insomniac version, Avengers Spidey fires half as fast, but that's not the only thing that's slow about the web shooting. There's a charge shot you can do that takes pretty long to charge. I compared it to Iron Man's charge shot, and Spidey's takes longer to charge. But there's also a silly spin animation he does before firing that makes this action take even longer. Once again, comparing this to Iron Man, he just shoots it out. He doesn't waste time doing some dumb little spin move. So between the longer charge time and longer wind up on the shot itself, this move is slow even compared to other characters in this game. Looking at his other combat animations, and I need to stress we are still only looking at their animations and not their functionality, they're not great either. Avengers Spider-Man has a 7-hit basic attack combo, while Insomniac's was only 4 hits, so it takes longer to achieve essentially the same thing. Because of that, Avengers Spidey feels slower despite moving at about the same speed. Something similar can be said about the air combo. These are the same amount of hits, 4, and both Spider-Men move at about the same speed for the first 3 hits. But then, Avengers Spidey does this slow little spin before his last kick, making the final hit come out way later than Insomniac's. It's not a huge thing I guess, but again, it makes him feel a lot slower. Spider-Man's ground pound in this game looks stupid. There's no eloquent way to say that. I mean, just look at it. What is this? What is this YMCA looking pose? This pose is actually the image used for the skill in the skill tree, so the devs were clearly proud of it, but I don't get why. This isn't a combat pose, this looks more like a dance pose or something. It's just so silly. In the Insomniac game, Spider-Man had an ability called the Web Blossom. It was a suit power, in other words a super move, that would nuke the surrounding area with webs as Spider-Man spun around dramatically. In Avengers, Spider-Man has a similar move called the Web Repeater. You might think that it would be one of his heroic abilities, which are the super moves of this game given how powerful it was in Insomniac's title. But no, it's actually a combo finisher, performed by pressing triangle for the last hit of the light attack combo. Since it's not a super move like it was in the Insomniac game, it's understandable that it isn't as powerful and impressive as it was there. But come on, it's so slow and awkward. Avengers is way more realistic here, but when it comes to animation, that's not always a good thing. Insomniac's animation is incredibly exaggerated. Seriously, pause and look at him as he's doing this, and you'll see that he does some pretty impossible poses. Between that, the higher movement speed, and the much higher density of webs being shot out in more directions, the animation looks way more powerful. Again, I know that this is comparing a super move to a combo finisher, so it's not the most fair comparison. That being said, why isn't this a super move in Avengers? All the characters in Avengers have 3. Spider-Man's are a drone, a web bomb, and a web wrecking ball. So looking at his more offense-focused ones, the web bomb and wrecking ball, one of them hurls a ball that explodes with web, and the other one hurls a ball that explodes with web. I mean, really? You couldn't replace one of these with a web blossom? And yeah, I know that Web Blossom also spreads web like an explosion, but at least it's visually distinct from these other 2 options. For the last examination of the visuals, I want to look at a specific takedown animation, the one called Don't Knock the Classic. I'd say that Spider-Man's takedowns in Avengers are generally pretty slow and awkward looking, but this one in particular is very similar to one from Insomniac, so we can make a direct comparison between the 2. Both animations have Spider-Man pull a guy towards him, then do a spin kick to take him down. The basics are the same, but they differ wildly in their subtleties and execution. In Avengers, he pulls the guy to the ground, and then spins around to kick him as the goon is picking himself up. Why? Spider-Man starts the windup of his kick before the guy even gets up. So he knew that he would get up? Then why drag him to the ground in the first place? The enemy also picks himself up really quick, too quick for how hard he got yanked. In the Insomniac game, Spider-Man pulls the goon directly to him and kicks, which is simpler and makes more sense. Also, Avengers Spider-Man lands on his feet after his kick, while Insomniac Spider-Man has to stop himself from falling by using one of his hands to land on the ground. This makes Insomniac Spidey look like he really put his back into that kick, selling the impact of the attack. In comparison, Avengers Spidey looks like he performed a light dance move. Overall, I'd say that Avengers Spider-Man is not animated well, and what I mean when I say that is that his movements do not properly convey the power and agility inherent to Spider-Man. Lacking in both the super and spidery departments, this version of the character moves around too much like a normal human being. His lack of speed is somewhat understandable given the general sluggishness of Avengers, but Spider-Man is a character known for his speed, so this is still a problem. Especially when he can be slow even compared to other characters in the game. That's it for the visual component of this Spider-Man. Now let's discuss how it feels to actually play him. If you asked me to describe how Spider-Man feels to control in Avengers with only one word, my answer would be rigid. I'm sure others would go with clunky, and I wouldn't disagree, but rigid really is the word that I think best encapsulates this version of the character. It really feels like you can only play him in a certain way and only do certain things. The fluidity and flexibility that defined Insomniac's take on the character are absent here. Despite having many of the same tools, you can't link them together satisfyingly, or in some cases, you can't link them together at all. Again, rigid. Despite being the only character in the game who can do air takedowns, Spider-Man can't do a takedown if he is in the air, but the enemy is on the ground. This isn't the biggest issue in the world, as usually trying to do a takedown on a grounded enemy while airborne will result in the game letting Spider-Man drop down to the ground and then perform the takedown, so not a huge problem, but it does feel awkward and deprives you of an option the Insomniac version was capable of. The web strike is entirely inconsistent because of how its input is also used for other attacks. It's the first hit of the heavy attack combo, and because of how this game's combat system works, going from light combo to heavy combo or vice versa will continue the combo instead of resetting it, so if you do several hits of the light attack combo and then try to web strike, you can instead end up with the swing kick or the web repeater. And I really hated whenever I did the web repeater by mistake because that's a really long uncancelable animation. You also can't do the web strike after a dodge because that will trigger the dodge after move instead. You can get around these restrictions by jumping if you're on the ground or dodging if you're in the air. But that doesn't change that these restrictions are there, which hinders what you can do in combat. The aerial web pull is mad inconsistent, sometimes pulling enemies above or below me, making follow-up attacks difficult to perform. Avengers' version of the off-the-wall attack, which is called Predator Instinct, what? Is horrible. It's awkward to perform and basically unusable. In Spider-Man 2018, you dodge into a wall which instantly sticks Spider-Man to it, then press square and he leaps off. It's incredibly intuitive and, more importantly, very quick to do. In Avengers, dodging into a wall does diddly squat. Instead, you need to jump onto a wall to stick to it first, then press square to blast off of it. This doesn't work as well because jumping is a vertical movement tool, not a horizontal one. So in order to get onto the wall, you have to be much closer to it. The ability also isn't as strong as the Insomniac one with less pushback. It doesn't feel good to do, it doesn't have a clear purpose, so it never really occurs to me to use this move. A massive omission from Insomniac Spidey's moveset is the leap off. In that game, Spider-Man could jump off enemies in combat to quickly transition into the air from the ground, maintain his aerial position, and fling enemies away. Without that ability, Avengers Spider-Man can't really do any of that. The way Avengers handles held inputs is really sluggish, which impacts the uppercut, ground pound, and slide under. When inputting these moves, the normal action accomplished by pressing the button is done first, and then the held input action comes out after. So when doing an uppercut or ground pound, Spider-Man will first perform a full light attack hit, and then the other action. Likewise, pressing and holding circle will first perform a dodge, and then the slide under move. I'm fairly certain the game functions like this to account for multiplayer, Wi-Fi issues, and delays, but this still impacts how the game feels in single player. This can be avoided somewhat by buffering the input during a web strike or slide under, but that's not always an option. The Insomniac game had a pretty good handle on discerning whether you were holding the button or just pressing it. Held inputs often came out immediately because the game correctly identified that's what you were doing. While it could take a second to realize this, the game still did a much better job of retaining fluidity between attacks. So when using the uppercut, for example, Spider-Man would start his basic attack, realize the player is holding the button, then cancel the basic attack to start the uppercut. Going from that to this is such a stark difference. It's especially bad with the ground pound. If you jump and then hold square near a grounded enemy, Spider-Man will be magnetized to them, coming close to the ground to hit them with the first air combo hit. He'll then be too close to the ground to do the ground pound and will instead transition to his grounded moveset. Unlike Insomniac Spidey, this guy can't easily gain altitude as he lacks a charge jump and the leap off ability I mentioned earlier. You can try web swinging or wall crawling to gain height, but good luck doing that at 3 miles an hour. If you try to use this attack at the start of the encounter when you swing in, it'll feel awful because of the delay caused by needing to do the first hit of his air combo. The whole point of a ground pound is to quickly get from the air to the ground, which is kinda ruined by this. Avengers Spidey can also do the swing kick. If you're familiar with the Insomniac game, then you might be confused as to how he does this, since the hold input for square is already taken up in Avengers by the ground pound. Well, the swing kick is the second hit of the heavy attack combo. Having the swing kick function like this makes it feel remarkably less fluid to use, as it's placed behind another button press and is no longer an ability you can just do. Spider-Man needs to manually reload his web shooters in this game. I think this might be the only game where he does this. Let me know if there's any other Spider-Man game where he has to physically reload his web shooters in gameplay. There is some novelty to this, as this is something Spider-Man does in the comics, cartoons, and some of the movies. However, there is a reason why seemingly no other Spider-Man game does this. It completely breaks the flow of combat to have Spider-Man reload this way. Because sure, it's not that long of an animation, just shy of 2 seconds, but it's still nearly 2 seconds where you're forced to sit there and wait before you can go back to playing the game. And if you continue to play as Spider-Man in this game, that's going to add up to a lot of wasted time, so while it might not seem like a big deal, it does become increasingly annoying the more you have to do it. There's also the issue of forgetting that you're out of webs or about to be out, then you try to shoot them and oh no, I have to reload. Once again, I'm sure some people will like this because it's more immersive or whatever, but I don't like this at all. It's just a needless interruption to gameplay. That's why Insomniac didn't have you reload the web shooters manually. Instead, they refill automatically so you can engage with the melee combat in the meantime. This way you are kept in the action and not periodically interrupting it. I also want to quickly mention Marvel Rivals, which is a shooter game where many characters are reinterpreted to function within the context of a shooter game. So characters that normally wouldn't need to reload have to reload. Doctor Strange has to reload his magic, and Storm has to reload the air around her, I guess? I don't know, that one still doesn't make sense to me. But even in that game, Spider-Man does not manually reload his web shooters. Instead, they refill automatically, pushing you to either continue moving or fighting in the meantime, once again, preventing awkward downtime on a character that is supposed to be fast. Spider-Man's aerial movement feels stiff. It can be difficult to turn while swinging and downright impossible to turn when doing his point launch. The point launch in Avengers is pointless in combat. Using it shuts down all combat inputs. I promise you I'm spamming every attack button in this clip, but nothing comes out until I touch the ground. Because of this, you cannot enter a fight with the point launch, nor can you use this mid-battle to reposition and continue your assault. You can get around this by swinging after the point launch, but that's another awkward workaround for a needlessly rigid ability. Actually, you can't really do anything from a perch point. Insomniac Spider-Man had a cool off-the-perched attack, performed by zipping to a perch point and then pressing square. It had essentially the same effect as the off-the-wall attack, and it was a cool way to enter combat or continue it in a multi-layered environment like enemy bases, and despite having a zip-to-point ability, this is not an option in Avengers. Nor can you shoot webs from a perch point. Granted, this ability was really only useful for stealth in the Insomniac game, but it was still a cool option to have that made your abilities feel more consistent since you could use them in more scenarios. I don't think this would be super useful in Avengers, but it wouldn't be completely useless either. Imagine zipping up to a safe spot and pelting people with webs while your team does most of the heavy lifting. Yeah, keep imagining because you can't actually do that in this game. His wall run has a large, glaring issue, and it's strange because it could be fixed by implementing something that other characters can already do. See, when Spider-Man is running on a wall, pressing X to jump will always result in him jumping vertically up the wall, even if you're running in a purely horizontal direction. Which makes me never want to wall run since I can't cleanly leave the wall while running. I don't even have to use the Insomniac game for a comparison here, I can make a local one. Captain America, Black Panther, and Winter Soldier can also do a wall run, though theirs only lasts a few seconds before they stiffly drop down. This always looked weird to me. They don't start trending downward after a bit, they just stop like, oops, I forgot what I'm doing. Anyway, getting back to the point I'm trying to make, during their wall run, jumping will always result in a horizontal jump that moves them forward. Why isn't Spider-Man afforded the same courtesy? Was it really so difficult to separate his wall run between a horizontal state and a vertical state? So that if he's running mostly vertically, jumping results in a vertical jump, but if he's moving mostly horizontally, then he gets a horizontal jump like the other characters of the wall run? Would that really have been so hard to do? Another issue of the horizontal wall run is that Spider-Man can't cleanly round corners on buildings. Instead, he will jump off when you reach the edge of the wall. Insomniac Spider-Man does the same thing, but that game also gives you the ability to round a building corner with a little web tether. That way you can choose between forward movement or using the building as a way to take a sharp turn. You do not have that option in Avengers. Insomniac Spider-Man could have trouble crawling onto ceilings, being able to transition from wall to ceiling just fine sometimes, but unable to do so other times. Avengers Spider-Man can't crawl on ceilings at all. Granted, there wouldn't be much practical use to be on a ceiling in Avengers. Insomniac Man could hang from the ceiling and shoot webs from there, which did look pretty cool, but like shooting webs off of perch points, this was mainly only useful for stealth. I don't think it would come in handy too much in Avengers, especially since you can't use Insomniac's manual zip-to-point ability to quickly zip to a ceiling, so actually getting on there would be slow and cumbersome here in Avengers. All that being said, keep in mind that Spider-Man can crawl and even run on ceilings in Marvel Rivals, despite there being hardly any need to actually do so. But it's cool, so yeah, I want to be able to do that. So now I think you see what I mean when I say that he feels rigid to play. There's so many things you can't do, so many little things here and there that you would expect to be able to do, only to find that you either can't or will have difficulty being able to do. And all of this is like the bigger problems, I would say, because there's a lot of like little weird things here and there, like attacks that don't lock on properly, or being unable to move in a direction while doing some actions, just a lot of stiffness, a lot of things, again, just feel rigid. Before we wrap up, it's worth asking, is there anything Spider-Man in Avengers does well? The answer is yes. Now, there isn't that much that this version does well, but it is worth celebrating his successes nonetheless. First, his web pull actually pulls people. The web pull was basically useless in the 2018 Insomniac game due to not actually being able to pull people towards you, something they fixed in the sequel, but Avengers did it correctly here. Secondly, an optional upgrade to his ultimate gives Spider-Man web gloves and boots to inflict web status on enemies with his melee attacks. This is great, it's something that makes sense for him, it's a fun idea, and it reminds me of the web boxing gloves he could make in the PS1 game. Thirdly, I mentioned earlier that I wasn't going to discuss Spider-Man's gear, but there is one exception. He has a gear perk that activates when he does an emote, taunting nearby enemies and lowering their defense. This is a fantastic gear perk. I'm sure it's not meta or whatever, but it has a tangible effect on gameplay. It makes use of emotes in a fun way, it plays into the character's personality, and it's unique. It's something no other character can do except for him, and it's something that's far more creative than basically like 90% of the gear in this game. Lastly, Spider-Man's web status is an inherent ability unique to Spider-Man. If you never paid attention to Avengers, this may seem like a strange thing to point out because it's Spider-Man, of course webs are going to be unique to him, right? But that's not normally how Avengers functioned. Many of the status effects in Avengers are things that should be unique to certain characters, but aren't because they can be given to anyone through the gear system. So things like gamma radiation, vibranium, and PIM particles can be used by anyone instead of being uniquely tied to the characters associated with them. The only exception to this is Spider-Man with his webs. They are in his kit by default, cannot be removed, and cannot be given to other heroes through gear. This makes him a legitimately unique character in this game since he has something only he can do. There's a fantastic write-up on Reddit that goes into further detail on how Spider-Man's web status illustrates the failings of Avengers' status effect system. I'll leave a link to it in the description for those that are interested in reading further into that topic. It's a good read, and if you've gotten this far into the video, you'll probably like it too. With that, I've fulfilled my promise of talking about Spider-Man's gameplay in Avengers. This year is the 5-year anniversary of the game's release, so I figured it was fitting. I've also got one more Avengers video left in me. If you're an OG follower of the channel, then you might remember me saying I'd make a bonus video going over the cut content of the game. I was planning to do that after the prolific leaker Miller wrote his tell-all article on the game, since I figured that would contain even more behind-the-scenes information, but he never did that, and I'm tired of waiting. What did you think of Spider-Man's gameplay in Avengers? Was there anything you think I missed? Let me know in the comments, and as usual, remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, use the hype feature YouTube has now to hype my video. I still don't really know what that does or how it works, but it helps me out, so do that too, and I will see you next time.